I'm 63 years old, and I still remember the exact moment my life changed. Not when my husband passed, not when I retired, but on a Tuesday afternoon in March when my daughter-in-law looked me dead in the eyes and said, "You need to start looking at assisted living facilities. We'll need the house, my house, the house I've lived in for 31 years. The house where I planted the rose bushes along the front walkway, where I painted the kitchen walls that soft sage green myself on a rainy October weekend, where I raised my son from a skinny 7-year-old who was afraid of thunderstorms into a grown man. My house." And she said it like she was telling me to pick up milk on the way home. Let me back up. My name is Judith, and was a pretty easygoing person. My late husband, Ronald, always said I was the most patient woman he'd ever met. He meant it as a compliment. Looking back, I wonder if I was just too patient for my own good. Ronald passed 6 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. 14 weeks from diagnosis to the end. I won't talk much about that because even now, writing this down, my chest gets tight in a way that doesn't go away easily. What I will say is that when he was gone, the house felt enormous. 3 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, a backyard that Ronald used to mow every Saturday morning while I drank coffee on the porch and watched him. After he was gone, I hired a teenager from down the street to do it. It wasn't the same. Nothing was. My son Brandon was 31 at the time. He and his wife, Melissa, had been married about 2 years. They were renting an apartment in Cincinnati, about 40 minutes from me, and struggling. Brandon had just been laid off from a sales job when the company downsized, and Melissa was working part-time at a dental office while finishing up some certification courses online. Money was tight. They were behind on rent. I offered without them asking. That's important to understand. They didn't come to me. I called Brandon one Sunday and said, "Why are you paying rent you can't afford when I've got 2 empty bedrooms and a basement that nobody uses?" He hesitated. I could hear him covering the phone and talking to Melissa in the background. He came back and said they'd think about it. 3 weeks later, they moved in. The first few months were fine. Better than fine, honestly. The house felt alive again. I could hear the television in the evenings, smell coffee being made by someone other than me in the mornings. Brandon and I fell back into old rhythms. He'd sit with me after dinner sometimes, and we'd watch old game show reruns the way we used to when he was a teenager. Melissa was quieter, more reserved, but I figured that was just her personality. She'd lost her mother young, I knew, and had grown up mostly independent. I didn't push. I made it clear from the beginning. No rent, no contribution to utilities, nothing. I just wanted them to get back on their feet. Get stable. Build something. My only requests were small. Keep the common spaces reasonably tidy. Let me know if they'd be out late so I didn't worry. And please don't move my things around without asking. That last one mattered to me. Ronald's reading chair was still in the living room, positioned exactly where he'd always kept it, by the window. I wasn't ready to move it. Melissa thought it was in an awkward spot. She mentioned it twice in the first month. I said no both times, and I thought that was the end of it. It wasn't, but I didn't know that yet. By the second year, things had shifted in ways I couldn't quite name at first. Melissa had gotten her certification and was now working full-time as an office manager at a medical practice nearby. Good salary, good benefits. Brandon had found a new job in logistics, not as high-paying as before, but steady. They had income, real income. And yet the talk of moving out never came up. Not once. When I gently mentioned it maybe 8 months in, just asking how things were going, if they had a savings goal in mind, Melissa changed the subject so smoothly I almost didn't notice I'd been redirected. I noticed, but I didn't push. Too patient. Like Ronald said. The changes were gradual. That's the thing about gradual changes. You adapt to each one in isolation, so you never see the full picture until you step back and look at how far you've come from where you started. Melissa began reorganizing the kitchen sometime around month 14. Said it made more sense the new way. I came downstairs one morning and couldn't find my cast iron skillet, the one I'd had since before Brandon was born. It was in a cabinet by the back door, behind some bags we used for recycling. I moved it back. The next week, it was in the same spot by the back door again. She started buying different groceries and leaving less room in the refrigerator for mine. She kept the thermostat at 68, which I found uncomfortably cold. I've always run cold, and when I turned it up, I'd come back an hour later to find it changed back down. These things sound small written out. They were small individually, but they were also my house, my kitchen, my thermostat. I said something to Brandon about the kitchen. He nodded, said he understood, said he understood, said he'd talk to her. Whatever conversation happened, the skillet went back to the wrong cabinet within a week. By year 3, Melissa had made friends with some of the neighbors. Closer friends, honestly, than I had with some of them. She hosted a small dinner for a couple down the street. In my dining room, with my table, with my good dishes. She asked permission, technically. She sent me a text. Would it be okay if we had the Hendersons over Friday for dinner? I'll clean everything up after. I said yes, because what was I going to say? But when Friday came and I tried to come downstairs to introduce myself, it was my house, these were my neighbors, Melissa gave me a look and then said very smoothly to the guests, Judith usually turns in pretty early. Don't you? As if I were a guest in my own home being politely shuttled to bed. I went back upstairs. I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time. I want to be clear, I never stopped loving my son. I loved Brandon completely. But there were moments in that 3rd and 4th year when I looked at him across the dinner table and thought, who are you? And when did you become someone who lets this happen? He had changed. Not in one big dramatic way. Gradually. The same way everything changed. He deferred to Melissa on everything. If she wanted the living room rearranged, it was rearranged. If she thought I watched too much television in the evenings, he'd come in and suggest I might want to take up reading again. He'd say it gently, kindly, but he'd say it. Ronald's chair disappeared in the 4th year. I came downstairs one morning and it was gone. Just gone. When I asked, Melissa said it had been donated. It was really worn, Judith, and honestly taking up space. She said it so matter-of-factly, like it was a reasonable housekeeping decision, like it hadn't been the chair where my husband used to fall asleep with a book on his chest every single Sunday afternoon for 22 years. I cried in my room for the better part of a day, and then I did something I probably should have done long before that. I called my attorney. Her name is Carol Whitman, and she's been handling my family's legal matters for almost 15 years. I didn't call with any specific plan. I just called to talk, to understand what my options were, to understand what I owned and what I was entitled to in my own home. She listened to everything, asked some questions, and then said, Judith, I want you to understand something very clearly. Your name is on that deed, sole ownership. They have no legal standing to stay there unless you want them there. I knew that. Of course I knew that, but hearing her say it out loud was different than knowing it quietly. She also said something else that stuck with me. I'd recommend making sure your will and any estate documents are current and very clear, because the longer this situation continues, the more complicated it can get emotionally, even if legally it's straightforward. I updated my will the following month. I didn't tell Brandon or Melissa. I also started paying closer attention to the household finances, not just my own accounts, but in general. I wanted to understand exactly what was mine, what was shared, what could be contested. I'm not a suspicious person by nature, but I was becoming one. Here is something I need to tell you about because it becomes important later. My father was a practical man. He grew up in rural Indiana during a time when practicality wasn't a choice, it was survival. One of his habits, one he passed to me, and that I always thought of as slightly eccentric, was that whenever we went somewhere and bought something significant, anything over a certain amount, he would always ask for 2 receipts if he could, or make 2 separate copies of important documents. 2 is 1 and 1 is none, he used to say. I never fully understood it until adulthood. About 2 years before all of this began, I had started buying lottery tickets. Not often, not compulsively, just every so often when I was out doing errands, I'd buy a scratch-off or a Powerball quick pick. Ronald had occasionally done it when he was alive, always with that slightly embarrassed smile, like it was a silly little indulgence he wasn't sure he should admit to. After he passed, buying one occasionally made me feel close to him in some small way. Silly, maybe. But grief takes you to unexpected places. Now, here is the thing. Sometime in the early spring of year 4, about 18 months before everything came to a head, I was at the gas station and I bought 2 Powerball tickets. Same drawing. Same numbers on one, quick pick on the other. I do this sometimes when the jackpot climbs. Buy 2 just to double up. I stuck one in my wallet, and, out of pure old habit, pure my father's daughter reflex, I slipped the other one into the small zippered compartment inside my winter coat pocket. I didn't even think about it consciously. My hands just did it. I forgot about both tickets, honestly. The jackpot that week was not won. The numbers didn't match. The tickets were worthless. Or so I assumed. Months passed. Seasons passed. I kept buying the occasional ticket. Kept mostly losing, like everyone does. Then, on a Saturday morning in October, Brandon came downstairs with an energy I hadn't seen in years, practically vibrating. He was holding a lottery ticket, and Melissa was right behind him, and she had her hands over her mouth, and they were both saying things I couldn't entirely track because they were talking over each other. Something about checking the numbers. Something about the app. Something about, and this is the part that finally broke through, $11 million. Not 75 million, 11. But $11 million is still $11 million. I sat down at the kitchen table, my kitchen table, and I listened as Brandon explained, his voice shaking, that he had been going through a jacket of his in the closet, an old one he hadn't worn since last winter, and he found a lottery ticket in the pocket. He'd checked it on the app. It matched. Every number. $11,200,000, cash value before taxes approximately $7,400,000 after federal and state. He was crying. Brandon, my son who hadn't cried in front of me since he was 19, was standing in my kitchen crying, and I felt, I will be honest, pure joy for him in that first moment. Complete and uncomplicated joy. My son, who had struggled and worked so hard, who deserved good things. I got up and hugged him. Then Melissa spoke. She wasn't crying. She was very calm and very focused, the way she gets when she's already done the thinking and is now simply executing. She said, "We've been talking, and we think the smartest thing is to buy a house outright, right away, before anyone can come after the money for anything. We've already been looking at some listings." She paused. "There's a place in Franklin we love, 4 bedrooms, 3 baths, new construction." I said that sounded wonderful. She said, "So we'll obviously be moving out soon, which means we'll need you to figure out your own arrangements." I said, "What do you mean, my own arrangements?" She said, "Well, you're 63. This house is pretty big for one person, and honestly, there's some really lovely senior communities in the area now. Independent living, not nursing homes, obviously. Just more appropriate for someone your stage of life. I've actually already pulled up a few that look nice." She said all of this with the same tone she uses to plan grocery trips. Organized, efficient, forward-thinking. I looked at Brandon. He was looking at the floor. I said slowly, "Melissa, this is my house," she said. "I know that, Judith, but the practical reality is," I said, "no. I want to make sure we're being clear. I own this house. My name is on the deed. Ronald and I bought it in 1994. It has never been in anyone else's name." She nodded, as if I were confirming something she already knew and had already accounted for. "Right. And we're not saying you don't own it. We're just saying this would be a natural transition point for everyone, and it makes sense to plan ahead." A natural transition point. Like I was a phase in their timeline. Like my home was a stepping stone. I excused myself and went upstairs. I sat in my room for a long time, longer than I had when Ronald's chair disappeared. I thought about the last 4 years. I thought about all the patience I'd exercised, and all the things I'd let go, and all the times I'd told myself to not make it a big deal, to keep the peace, to be flexible. I thought about my father and his habit of always making 2 of everything just to be safe. And then I thought about a jacket. I have a winter coat, a dark burgundy wool coat I bought 8 years ago at a Nordstrom after Christmas sale. I love that coat. I don't wear it every year, so sometimes it hangs in the back of the closet for a full season. Inside, in the small zippered interior pocket that you'd only find if you were specifically looking for it, I keep small things. A folded $20 bill for emergencies, an old chapel card from Ronald's funeral that I can't bring myself to throw away, and sometimes the second of 2 identical purchases. I went to my closet. I took out the burgundy coat. I unzipped the interior pocket. The ticket was there. My hands were not entirely steady when I took it out. It was folded in quarters, slightly creased. I smoothed it out on my nightstand, and I looked at the numbers 7, 14, 23, 31, 42, Powerball 9. I opened the lottery app on my phone. My hands were shaking enough that I mistyped my passcode twice. I entered the numbers manually rather than scanning the barcode because I wanted to be sure of every digit. The screen showed the drawing date, the prize, the confirmation. This ticket, my ticket, the one I bought and put in my own coat pocket and forgot about, was also a winner. Same drawing, same numbers, same prize amount. Both tickets, purchased at the same time from the same gas station, both won. The legal question of who won what. I will explain this clearly because I know people wonder about this. In the state of Ohio, a lottery ticket is the legal property of whoever purchased it. Brandon's ticket, which he found in his jacket pocket, was a ticket I had originally purchased, and in his possession without my knowledge or consent. I had not given it to him. He had not asked. He had simply found it in clothing he apparently borrowed or moved at some point. The way things drift in shared households after years. That was a dispute I was prepared to make, but ultimately never had to make in full. Because of what happened when I went downstairs with my ticket, Melissa was in the kitchen, on the phone with someone. I suspect a financial advisor or real estate agent, given what she was saying about liquid assets. Brandon was at the dining room table on his laptop, already deep in research about the Franklin house. I walked in and set my ticket on the table in front of Brandon. He looked at it. He looked at me. He looked back at it. I said, very quietly, "Do you want to check the date and the numbers?" He picked it up. He looked at it for a long time. His face went through several stages, confusion first, then recognition, then something I didn't have a word for right in that moment. Something between shame and vertigo. Melissa had ended her phone call. She was watching from the kitchen doorway. Brandon said, "Mom, this is the same drawing," I said. "I bought 2 tickets. I kept one in my coat. I forgot about it. We both forgot about it." There was a long silence. I said, "I need you both to understand that I'm not going to fight with you. I'm not going to make a scene. I love my son and I always will. But I am not leaving my home, and I think the 4 years I've spent here with you have demonstrated pretty clearly that I have been more than generous." Melissa started to say something. I raised one hand, not aggressively, just to stop. I said, "I called Carol Whitman this morning. She's expecting us Thursday if you'd like to get everything sorted out properly and legally." The meeting with Carol was, professionally speaking, fairly simple. Brandon's ticket had been purchased by me. I could demonstrate this through the gas station security footage and my own credit card statement from the date in question. The ticket was in his possession without my knowledge. Not a gift, not a transfer. My ticket was unambiguously mine. The legal outcome was not going to favor the idea that they had exclusive claim to a combined 11 million. What happened in that conference room was not dramatic. It was not a screaming fight. It was 2 people sitting across a table, looking at the reality that they had overplayed a very weak hand. In the end, we did come to an agreement. Not because I had to, but because Brandon is my son and I raised him with better values than were on display those past 4 years. And I believed, sitting in that room, that somewhere under all of it, he still had them. We agreed that he would receive a portion, a meaningful portion, structured as a formal, legal, documented gift, not an informal handout, with clear terms. He and Melissa would purchase their own home within 60 days. They would vacate my house in an orderly way with 60 days' notice, which I considered generous under the circumstances. Melissa did not thank me. She signed the paperwork and did not make eye contact with me for most of the meeting. I did not need her thanks. Brandon walked me to my car afterward. It was a gray Thursday afternoon, chilly, the kind of November day that smells like wood smoke and dead leaves. He stood there for a moment and then he said, "I don't know when I stopped. I don't know how I let it get." And he couldn't finish the sentence. I touched his arm. I said, "I know." He said, "I'm sorry about the chair, Mom. I'm so sorry." I didn't say anything to that. Some things don't fit inside an apology. Not because the apology isn't real, but because that the thing that was lost is too specific to be recovered by words. Ronald's chair was Ronald's chair. There's nothing to say. They moved out 6 weeks later, on a Saturday in January. I stood on the porch in my winter coat, my burgundy coat, and I watched the moving truck pull away. It was very quiet after. The kind of quiet that used to feel lonely. This time it felt like something else. It felt like mine. I bought new furniture in February, not because I needed it, but because I wanted to. I let myself enjoy the process in a way I hadn't allowed myself since Ronald passed. Going to stores, sitting in chairs, running my hand along different fabrics. I found a reading chair, not the same as Ronald's, nothing could be, but a good chair. Wide and deep near the window. Good light in the morning. I still buy lottery tickets occasionally. Not often. But when the jackpot climbs, I buy two. I write my initials on both of them in small letters, in pen, before I put them in my wallet. My father would approve. I've thought a lot about what I would do differently. That's the question people always ask, isn't it? If you could go back, what would you change? And for a long time I had a long answer to that. I'd have said something earlier about the kitchen. I'd have addressed the chair before it disappeared. I'd have had the conversation with Brandon in year 2 instead of letting things drift until year 4 had quietly swallowed up whatever we used to be to each other. But I'm not sure anymore that doing it differently is the right frame, because what I've come to understand is that the way things unfolded, every slow erosion, every small surrender, all 4 years of it, those things had consequences. And the consequences were honest. They revealed exactly what was true. About Melissa, about Brandon for a time, and about me. Here's what I mean. The reason I had that ticket in my coat pocket was not luck. It was a habit my father built in me over decades of small, consistent lessons about being prepared, about not assuming things will hold, about keeping your own record of what is yours. He never told me that habit would matter. He just practiced it, and I absorbed it, and it became part of how I moved through the world. That is what I would call intelligence. Not the kind that scores well on tests, but the kind that accumulates quietly through paying attention and doing the careful thing even when it doesn't seem necessary, especially when it doesn't seem necessary. And the reason I was able to walk into Carol's office and have a real conversation, the reason I wasn't scrambling, wasn't vulnerable, wasn't at anyone's mercy, was because I had been paying attention for years before that October morning. I had updated my will. I had kept my name on my deed. I had never signed anything over to anyone in a moment of sentiment. That's not coldness. That's self-respect expressed through action. You protect what matters to you before someone else decides whether it matters to them. What I grieve still is not the money or the chair, or even those 4 years. What I grieve is the version of Brandon that I raised, and the distance between that boy and the man who stood in my kitchen looking at the floor while his wife told me to start looking at senior living facilities. That distance didn't appear overnight. It grew the way most damaging things grow. So gradually, that each individual step seemed like nothing. I should have named it earlier, not for my sake, but for his. Letting someone become someone you no longer recognize is not the same as being patient. I understand that now. But I also watched him stand by my car on a gray November afternoon, unable to finish a sentence, and I have to believe that whatever got covered up in those years is still in there. People are not fixed things. They can accumulate damage, and they can also slowly shed it. What matters is whether they're honest enough with themselves to start. I bought a reading chair in February. I put it by the window where the light comes in good in the morning. I sit there now with my coffee, and sometimes I think about my father, and sometimes I think about Ronald, and sometimes I just sit there and think about nothing at all. That's the whole inheritance, really. Not the ticket, not the money, just the knowledge that what is yours remains yours as long as you're paying attention, and the wisdom to know the difference between generosity and surrender before it's too late to tell them apart.